Once you were old enough, what were the dark family secrets you were finally let in on? Got a Facebook message from one guy asking if I was related to my dad. Since it's not a common last name, I thought he was a fan of his work. Because I was in college at the time and the guy was about the same age as me. And that's how I found out my dad slept around and that I had a half brother the same age as me. Not very much a secret, but took me until I was older to understand what was happening. My mom would sometimes have us play a game called Army, which consisted of me, my mom, and my siblings army crawling around our apartment. Kind of a hide and seek style game. She would yell hit the deck randomly and we would all drop and find a hiding spot. We would giggle and giggle while my mom army crawled around looking for us. We loved the game so much. I realized a few years ago while retelling the story that we lived in a really terrible neighborhood. And she would yell it out when she heard gunshots outside the building. I'm assuming she was worried about stray bullets. Edit. I shared everyone's amazing comments with my mom. And she shed a tear. She feels very appreciated on International Women's Day today. Your mom is a f-king G. My grandfather got out of serving in Vietnam by robbing pharmacies and going to jail for years. Whoa. Mine got out of it by telling the Navy that he could type. So he remained stateside and typed reports or something for his unit. He said he was one hell of a two-fingered typist. When I was about 10, my cousin and his dad died. I always thought it was an accident, and on the same day, when I was old enough, I was told that his dad actually committed suicide and my cousin followed him couple months later. Truly devastated me, although I didn't know them well. Edit. Thank you for the warm words and also for sharing your similar stories with me. I've read all the replies. My grief is still there because I understand that with professional help both would maybe still be here today. It just wasn't common to seek help back then. I hope all of you are well. My grandmother tried to murder my grandfather when she got sick of him beating the shit out of her every day. She swung an axe at him and he blocked it with his hand and lost his thumb. She left him before I was born. That my cousin was actually my half brother. Mum got pregnant in college and my aunt and uncle adopted him. And that my dad wasn't my biological father. Mum and dad got divorced. She got pregnant by another man. And my dad wasn't able to have kids of his own, so they got remarried and he raised me as his own. My uncle is believed to have murdered 2 Australian police officers in the late 80s. Not so much let in on, as we found out by accident. But apparently my dad's first love and him got into a serious car crash when he was 25 and she died. He lived with her father for years after her death. He still occasionally comes to visit my dad. Even 30 years later. We were always told he was a mentor until my sister pressed my mom on the subject. One of my sisters is even named after the girl that died, middle name, and we never even knew about her until last year. None of us have ever brought it up with him. My friend was engaged to his first love in their early 20s when she passed from cancer. 10 years later, he got married to an amazing woman who honored his late fiancé registered sign in their wedding ceremony. Not a dry eye in the place. My grandma retired and she still decided to work for her brother in his restaurant to save up money for when she dies. Funerals are, obviously, expensive. She insisted he would hold on to her paychecks and pay for her funeral when she dies. He never did. The reason I had a live-in babysitter when I was 5 that moved in at 2 AM was because my mom's cousin killed 2 kids and we ended up harboring his daughter during the trial. He's the only person on death row in my county. My father cheated on my mum with my sister and I's horse riding instructor. We'd always thought it ended amicably. We only found this out while mum was admitting to having contemplated driving off the road with us in the car as kids, as opposed to raising us as a single mum with no career or stable job. Edit. Oh man, I totally read this wrong at first and thought there was some horrible incestuous abuse going on. Either way, I'm so sorry. My grandmother's first husband was extremely abusive. But this was the 60s and he hid it well. She couldn't file for divorce without proof of injury. So she beat herself in the face with a slipper to get away. She was 21 or 22 or so with 3 young children. I'm 23 right now and I could never imagine. She was such a strong lady. I miss her. 3. Edit. Just wanted to say thanks for the awards. I'm glad times have changed for women. But we still have a long way to go. Grandma had 13 siblings. Of those 7 women are still alive. Once a year they have a sister day where they all except one are going somewhere to have fun. They've been doing this since they were teens. All but one sister. Who has been lied to her whole life about Sister Day. Because she thinks it doesn't exist. This is supposed to have been started when that one sister borrowed something and didn't give it back. Or something trivial like that. We are all reminded whenever we all get together, pre-pandemic, that we're not to talk about this. Because it will hurt that sister. Still can't wrap my head around how backstabbing bitchy some family members of mine are. Because this is just stupid. My uncle was ARPed as a young boy and my grandparents not only didn't believe him, but beat him and disowned him for bringing such lies into our house. Sad thing is, I was ARPed as a kid and while dealing with that my dad told me what happened to my uncle. I assume so I didn't feel so alone. My uncle is still the only one I know personally who has experienced the same trauma as me. And I'm not meant to know so can't talk to him about it. Edit. Typical this has blown up edit. But seriously. Whoa. However, I'm not gonna bring up someone else's trauma to them. I'm particular in who in my life I tell. If I knew someone I trusted had been telling other people I'd be hurt by that. So not gonna do that. Thank you to those sending some love. I'm not alone now though. I have people I can talk to which is nice. Going to be starting a group thing at therapy where I'll be able to speak to other abuse victims. I think that will help too. My grandfather's brother left the family business after a feud to sell tractor parts to Africa. When I was an adult, I was told these were semi-automatic tractor parts. My grandparents spent some time in lockup after my grandpa killed their newborn in a shell shock induced frenzy. They were jailed because they buried her body in a cave and tried to hide it. My mom and her siblings were all adopted out very young and went back to their parents around 11 years or so later. I knew that growing up, but didn't know why until I was older. To put it shortly, my family tree is more like a very long branch. Yes, we have the genetic defects to prove it. My uncle wasn't missing a ton of birthday parties, family reunions, holiday dinners, etc. when I was a kid because of his really busy job. But because he became a heroin addict after his wife took off with their daughter. My cousin who I've still never met. Edit. Oh yeah, he also tried to stab my aunt, his sister, in a drug-fueled rage when she went off on him about being a bum and exploiting my grandparents' kindness. My grandpa stopped him but got beaten unconscious in the process. My grandparents' neighbor heard the commotion and had to rush in and stop him at gunpoint. I legit thought he was just a normal, nice guy who I happened to rarely see before I learned all this shit in one night. That my grandpa molested all the women in our family. Not just me. And they let it happen because that's just what you do. When my grandfather molested me, young adult at the time, my grandmother literally got down on her knees and begged me not to tell because it would bring shame to the family. Sorry, Gran. He brought shame to the family with his actions. It's not my duty to protect him or your reputation. That is actually what you FCK don't ever do. Holy shit. Thanks for all the awards. And FCK you grandpa, and also Uncle Roy from the other thread. My dad's sister had a secret daughter that would have been approximately his age. She was 16 years older than him. And the family didn't tell him until he was in college. In their small town, there is a not zero chance he could have did date his niece. Edit. For those asking. My dad was 3-4 when this happened. He remembers a lot of shouting at the time. But not the topic. Also, My paternal grandfather was an alcoholic wife abuser who regularly cheated on grandma. When my father was a teenager, he stood up to him and threatened to kill him if he ever touched her again. The abuse stopped. My grandmother's sister, my great aunt, got pregnant out of wedlock in the 1950s. She was put up in a birthing home and the child was adopted out. She hid the whole thing from her whole family minus my grandmother, the eldest of the family of 8 and the one who helped hide her. After she had the baby, she came back home after living with her sister for a while. No one knew till about 10 years ago. My mom for him. He is a nice man that had an average childhood with parents that loved him. Fortunately, my parents led me to believe that my grandfather, on my mother's side, had died due to a heart attack. A year later they revealed he actually shot himself in the head. Two come to mind. 1. My uncle sexually molested my youngest aunt throughout most of her life. He later went on to marry and have a few daughters. You can guess what happened to his daughters. He's still welcome to what's left of the family collective. Obviously the 4 daughters have separated themselves from the rest of the family and I can't blame them. I didn't welcome him back, but I haven't had contact with my cousins since I was in high school. 2. My youngest aunt developed a drinking problem to cope with what happened to her. She had a lot of miscarriages after their firstborn. Miraculously they had another kid. Unbeknownst to all but my mother, she was also having an affair at the time. Still don't know if the uncle is the biological father. Doubt we will ever know for sure. 3. Edit. He was brought up on charges. Grandpa believed son was innocent. Court ruled in his favor. He got off scot-free. He did not marry his own sister. It was some other lady, who admittedly was a piece of work as well. Turned a blind eye to everything until the whole family found out. My cousins lived with us for a while and we thought that was fun because it's like a sleepover every day. One time our mom even took us out of school to pick them up. I learned later that it was because Child Protective Services took my cousins away from their mom because of mental health issues. My mom offered to take her sister's kids until she got her mental health back in order. My cousins live with their mom now and their mom is in a much better condition mentally. My mom's bio father lost custody of her in the late 70s during my grandma's and his divorce. She never knew why. Come to find out years later, some kind of freaky PRN was found in his possession that caused him to lose custody. My mom then realized that the memories of him staring at her while she was changing and touching her weirdly when she was child meant it was probably CP that the courts found. My father always tells me as a joke that it's my fault my mom and him are married, I'm the second son. But through the years from drunk conversations and several sources I've pieced the story together. My parents separated before they knew my mother was pregnant and only came back together after I was born. My dad's uncle died in a boating accident with his cousins. My family let me know he was possibly drowned in the middle of the lake by his cousins because of some money issues. No one was ever prosecuted though and the family is still very close. Weird. My step-grandfather molested my 3 aunties. My eldest sister and possibly my other sister and cousin. Only found out when my nana was dying 11 years after he died. They are buried side by side and I cannot bring myself to go visit my nana because he is there also. Edit. Thanks for all the comments about visiting my nana and ignoring him. I will try. For those saying my nana had to have known. I have discussed this at length with my auntie and we are certain she didn't. She worked nights for many. It sounds like a good opportunity to take a piss. My grandma actually legally disowned my mother for marrying my dad. The family house was supposed to go to my mom. But after the disowning, grandma didn't say who she wanted house to go to, resulting in a decades-long family feud that has split the family even to this day. Sad thing is, my parents actually ended up divorced after 20 years of marriage. Mom took care of my grandma till the end and was the one who handled the funeral arrangements when my grandma passed 2 years ago. She never asked for the house back. It's worth millions. Nobody told me any of this until I was 30. My mom had a brother who died in childhood. Maybe 9 or 10. I always thought he drank cleaning chemicals and died that way. But turns out he was hit by a school bus while riding his bike. Now I know why my mom was so anxious about me biking on the road. My dad is in a cult. Wasn't much of a secret. But as a kid you just kinda assume everything your parents do is the norm. When I was around 3-4, my aunt and her 3 sons came and lived with us for a few weeks. One night my mom stayed up and I found her downstairs sitting in a chair looking out the window. One day, my aunt and the boys moved and never came back. Turns out, she was going through a nasty divorce. She had the boys at the house with her while she was packing things one day. And her husband came home. He locked the boys in a room, stabbed her, and then shot himself. My mom had been staying up with a gun that night because she had seen him in our backyard earlier that night. My grandfather molested his children when they were young. My aunts and uncle didn't speak about it till they reached their 20s and 30s. They hid their experience to their siblings, but little did they know. They all experienced the same thing. They all suffered trauma but didn't tell my grandmother about it because she loves our grandfather very much. Grandma didn't decide to move in with us because she loved us so much and wanted to spend more time with us. Grandma moved in because her son was a meth addict and convinced her to put his name on the house, take all the money out of it for renovations, and leave her homeless. She had a heart attack the night she found out and now has to live with a pacemaker. FCKU Uncle Roy. I was told that my mother's older brother had died in an accident. He was intoxicated and got run over by a train. A whole bunch of unfortunate circumstances etc. My grandmother often mentioned it with sadness, because she considered him a brilliant boy, very handy and had a hopeful career in arts. He was a teenager when he died. However, every time this story came up, my mother's face hardened and she never spoke about it herself. I could kinda sense that there was something left unsaid. But I was a kid, so I didn't really question the story. My mom finally confided in me about a year ago that she was sexually abused by her brother and that it was not an accident, but a suicide. My grandmother has no idea. When my grandfather died, he wrote his will on his deathbed. He left his entire estate to my family, which was enormous. His wife, however, who despised us, in the biggest FCKU move I've ever seen, wrote a directly conflicting will, leaving the estate to her family, none of whom I've ever met, and then killed herself. It took around 5 years in legal hell to sort that out. We ended up winning the case in the end, but it cost so much that we couldn't afford to keep his $3 million house anymore. My uncle and 2 aunts had an incestuous threesome going on in the 70s. They invited my mum, who refused and was pretty horrified. My dad, their brother, had zero idea. Cousin of mine's dad blew his own head off in the horse stall next to him while they were cleaning them. I was told about that at around 15 because I was going to spend some time with them, and was told not to mention their father. My father got my mother pregnant when he was a teacher in high school. He was 30 and married. She was 15 and his student. They ran off together. He got a divorce, and they got married in a state that allowed marriage at 16. 2 months before my older brother was born. I was in senior year of high school when I was told about the family tragedy by my grandparents. My grandfather's brother murdered his wife. She was trying to divorce him and he snapped. He went to jail and their son, my dad's cousin, was alone. He was in middle high school. My grandparents convinced the deceased mother's side of the family to let them finish raising him and were able to get him back on a good path after the trauma he suffered. He has grown up into an absolutely wonderful man with a wonderful family and I love him. I wasn't actually let in on it. My mother apparently had a miscarriage between me and my older brother. I was supposed to have an older sister. Or maybe I wouldn't be born if she was. I simply overheard her crying about the experience over the phone to my aunt, mom's older sister, and it still bothers her after all these years. They speak Hakka. Non the main Chinese language Mandarin.